We often overestimate our labor and we underestimate other people's. And if we don't recognize it in our partners, it creates resentment, and resentment kills relationships. Simple ways you can start to tackle this are: emotional labor isn't the only type of labor in a relationship. Mental labor, financial labor, physical labor, conflict labor. And then I haven't even added in kids. In the early days of a relationship, a good healthy woman is looking for evidence of your ability to take on some of these labors. Be really, really mindful. This is the sort of thing that shows it. Organizing dates, asking good questions, being curious, sharing about how you feel about things in your own life, in your own patterns, in your own future. All of these labors per se is responsibility. Too often what we do is we don't take responsibility and we just wait to be told we should be responsible for. That's why your relationship's sexless. That's why you barely talk. This is why you're disconnected. Labor. These are things that need to be done. So what is emotional labor, right? Emotional labor is this thing that gets bandied around and talked about when it comes to relationship, and especially something that women are constantly doing. But emotional labor isn't the only type of labor in a relationship. This is something I've been thinking about for the last couple of months, and I've been speaking to various men about it, because these different types of labor we do in relationship often, and if we don't recognize it in our partners, it creates resentment, and resentment kills relationships. So if you're finding that your partner is frustrated, angry, irritable, doesn't want to have sex with you, for example, there could well be there's a bunch of labor that they are doing, that she is doing, that you are not acknowledging, that you don't notice, right? And ultimately what we're looking for is to create some sort of, what do we call it? Harmony, equality, equity within the relationship when it comes to the different types of labor. Because if we do not, like I said, you're going to start to create resentment, and resentment breeds anger, and resentment destroys relationships, right? I can't tell you the number of times I've sat down with men whose relationships are falling apart because their partner is fed up with their contribution to the relationship, right? So let's dive into this. I'm not going to faff around. I'm going to give you the different types. I'm going to say what they are, and I'm going to actually saying what they are is enough for you, you know, because you'll start to see like, okay, this is something my partner does, or this is something that I do. And one caveat to start with, I'm going to say here, we often overestimate our labor and we underestimate other people's. You can see this at work, right? You can see this when you're on Instagram and you're comparing yourself to people. You overestimate our own labor and how hard things are for us and what we do, right? We overestimate what we do and we underestimate what other people do because we don't see it, right? And this is the thing with these different types of labor. Many of them are very hidden and unseen, and they can be unseen, right? Some are more material, but there's the labor that sits behind them often is just, you know, it's like the tip of the iceberg. We see the tip of the iceberg. We don't see everything else. Right. So emotional labor, let's start with emotional labor. This is the first one, right? Because I think this is an important one, because I think this is where as men, we struggle, right? And the reason we struggle with emotional labor is because we're not emotional, right? We're not emotional. We're not trained in being emotional. Our emotionality is often trained out of us. So we lack in emotional capacity. I know that's not all men, but it does make a difference, right? So what is emotional labor? It is the hidden labor that's constantly upheld by someone in a relationship, right? And it can be either partner. Sometimes men do this, more often women do it, right? The studies show that women pull more emotional labor in a relationship than men. This is something that's research backed. So you may be one of the other people who, you know, you're a man, you're doing all this labor. So it can be things like tracking the emotional state of the relationship. Like, how are we feeling? Are we connected? Are we disconnected, right? Are we together? Are we not together, right? It can be anticipating conflict. Like, oh, is things feeling a bit frosty? Is something going wrong? Do we need to do something about this? It can also be testing out, not feeling into, like, are we feeling strained? Do we need to do some connection things? Do we need to do things to bring us together, right? That's something that's part of emotional labor. It can be regulating nervous systems, right? Regulating our own feelings, regulating our partners. What's it called? The word I'm looking for is, we could be us instigating co-regulation. Yeah. When one partner or both of you have, you know, you've become a bit dysregulated, you've been a bit frustrated, you've been a bit disconnected, the person who brings you back together, right? These are all labors, right? And I'm going to keep going because there's some more examples. Holding space for one partner's feelings and emotions. For example, I speak to a lot of men who they don't have capacity to process and understand their feelings and emotions. And they've used their partner as someone who's done that. Their partner is wanting to do that because it's a way that partner can feel them more deeply, right? But this is also a labor because you have to sit and you have to listen and you have to dissect and you have to pull things apart. Now, I also speak to men who are more likely to be friends of mine than anything else and colleagues where they do this labor. And it's interesting, I find when a man starts to gain in his emotional capacity and he has a great emotional capacity and he's emotionally in tune, the women he meets are so joyful they can be of a man who can actually hold space for them, that they pour into him, and that sometimes it can be a lot for a man over time. Yeah. Emotional labor can also be remembering emotional details like anniversaries. It can even be things like birthdays and stuff like that, because there's a constant. Why is it an emotional labor? Because it's having to feel outwards. Yeah, it's like an awareness piece. I'm like feeling outwards, like from me, what's going on around us? What's going on around us? What's going on around us? What's occurring for us? Right. And it creates a lot of work. It's like a sonar constantly having to be on. Right. It's a labor that has to be done. So this comes from a bunch of work, the Gottman's researched into this and so forth, right? But ultimately, what often happens is one partner is constantly scanning and having to work on the emotional container of the relationship. And when the burden lies on one person, this can erode away at sexual desire, safety, respect, even feeling, appreciated as well. Yeah. And this is the thing, a lot of us men, what we think to ourselves is like, oh, emotional labor. Well, I don't create any drama. So that means I'm not creating any labor. It's like, actually, the lack of drama you create could be actually creating disconnection, which actually becomes emotional labor. Your emotional absence can create an emotional labor for your partner, right? And your lack of ability to say co-regulate, or your lack of ability to notice what's going on in the relationship beyond your own experience also creates an emotional labor for your partner, right? So this is something to do. So, simple ways you can start to tackle this are, start to listen to your partner better. Ask more questions about how they're feeling. How's your day? How are you feeling about that thing, right? Take over the management of certain items, right? Like, I don't know, birthdays and anniversaries. Put them in your diary so you get the notification 2 weeks before it happens. Oh, it's my grandma's anniversary. Oh, sorry, birthday. I'm going to take care of it, right? You're taking over these emotional pieces, right? You start to learn how to co-regulate, bring yourselves back together. Like, oh, actually, notice when your partner's off and you be curious and you ask, and actually you do something like, hey, you feel a little bit off today. How are you? Did something happen at work? Are you, is something going on with you, right? That's what you can start to learn to do, and it'll be deeply appreciated. And this is something I'm going to say multiple times through this episode is, be appreciative for this labor in your partner, right? Because you're going to start to listen and go, actually, shit, my partner does this all the time, right? So simply being like, when she does buy the birthday gifts for your auntie, you're like, hey, I really appreciate the way that you always take care of these birthday gifts for people, and like you're so thoughtful with it, and blah blah blah. Like, you actually be grateful and go to depth of the gratitude and what you're noticing, what they've done, right? So that at least if they are doing the labor, there's an appreciation for it. And then you can add in like, hey, would you like me to take over some of this? Or you can just be straight, I'm going to take over some of this because I feel like this is a lot for you to handle with everything else that you're doing. Boom. You honestly, you'll go a really long way when you start to do these things. Okay. Mental labor. This is often very closely aligned to emotional labor, a mental, cognitive, right? And this is often about like remembering stuff, right? So this is remembering what needs doing. This can be around the house, can be around the car. So like, paying attention to MOTs. If you're in the UK, I don't know what you do in the States. It could be paying attention to, you could even argue that to some degree, cognitive labor is like paying attention to how much fuel and petrol's in the car, right? If you're putting your mind to something, like thinking about these things. Yeah. About, maybe the contract's up on your lease in your house soon, or the You notice that certain rooms need decorating, or, you know, whatever it is, but this what needs doing, keeping this running list of what needs doing in the house, in our lives, if you've got children, in their lives, which could add a huge amount of this cognitive and emotional labor when you have children. Trust me, I know it's happened to me, of having to manage a child, and like when they need to go to nursery and they need to go to doctors, and like when they need to go to the dentist, like all these things, it's a load to carry, right? Just planning, scheduling, coordinating life logistics, you know, moving children from place to place, like knowing what kid needs to be where for what practice, right? Because this is taking over this ownership instead of waiting to be told, right? Because waiting to be told still puts the mental labor on your partner, right? As well as anticipating future needs and problems. Yeah, that's something that's going to be really important. It's like, oh, I see that in 6 months' time, this thing could be an issue. Yeah. And maybe it's a case of going, oh, I noticed in 6 months' time, this is going to be an issue. What I think we should do about it is this, and this. That's alleviating the load because you're clearly taking on responsibility for it. Yeah. And like I said, childcare, social commitments, can even be to some degree mental load is like planning, like social stuff. Like, oh, if you're going to have people over for dinner, like what we're going to eat, what time do people need to get there? Like when do we need to tidy up the house? Like all these sorts of things, right? These are the loads that our partners often carry. And by acknowledging them or taking on some of these things actively, it can make a huge difference to our partners, right? Really important, because it just comes down to this a lot. Financial labor. This one's important because I think this is something we kind of downplay, I think, in the modern world. I think when we get to a certain level of life and earnings, I think what we do is we downplay the importance of the person who's doing financial labor, right? Which is the person who is kind of earning money for our shared security to pay for the bills, the house, the car, the stuff, the holidays, right? But it's not just that, the financial labor, because the financial labor can also be things like organization of our finances, right? And when I say finances, I mean like savings, our pensions, our investments. If you've got investment property, you know, looking after that, you know, taxes, you know, all these things are financial labor. It can be budgeting, it could be handling debt, credit cards, making sure they get paid on time, making sure the accounts are all organized and even, and all those sorts of things, right? The person who is financially really holding in their heads a lot of the kind of the money side, but also a financial labor is, if money is a struggle, is the person who carries the weight of that, right? Who carries the weight of the struggle that you have around money and not having enough. This is a psychological weight for provisioning. And I speak to a lot of men because I often find, you know, the men that I work with, as I mentioned before, you know, they're entrepreneurs, they're kind of, you know, high up in their careers. They're often shouldering most of this burden for themselves, and they carry it. We carry it silently, right? So especially the new dads that I've spoken to, they become dads, and suddenly the fear of losing their job becomes huge because their partner stopped working, gone on maternity leave, right? So the burden they carry, the labor they carry, is massive, right? And it can be related to, you know, often, you know, looking at the economic climate, you know, thinking about house prices and rental prices and so forth, right? And so what I'm really getting at here is financial labor isn't just about money and making money. It's a level of like responsibility. It's kind of orientation and direction, the pressure that all comes with it. But it's not just make the money, I'm done, feet up, which I think too often as men, we have been taught that that is being a good man. If I make money, I bring it into the house and it goes into the bank account, my job is done. I'm going to put my feet up and I'm done. Everything else is my partner's responsibility. And that might have been the case in the past, right? It might be enough. And it is enough for some people. Some people in the world are happy with that. Some women are happy with just that, but not as many as maybe 50 years ago, right? So ultimately, if you're wanting a really mature, really deep relationship, you need to be able to create these other levels of other types of labor in your relationship. Because when it comes to the financial one, it's not just about the money. You can make loads of money, but if you're shit with your investments and you overspend constantly, that money might as well not be there. But I think this labor is the one that often is kind of neutralized and in families more and more, because it's been over-indexed on by men. because it's been over-indexed as like, this is my only sole job. So it's almost like if you really want to create a harmonious home and relationship, you kind of discount the money-making aspect, because really, when I'm talking to men, most of them are in relationship with their female partners, if that's a marriage or a relationship, and their partner is also earning, right? And ultimately, if both of you are working full-time, you're both putting in the same sort of work, labor, and hours, right? You're probably working as hard as each other to some degree, right? So you making more money with your time, or she making more money with her time, doesn't mean that your financial labor is more or her financial labor is more. And this is something you have to get in your mind. Just doing this one, just making money is not enough when it comes to labor in a relationship. You will get a certain level of appreciation, right? But ultimately, it's not enough to create a happy household. And so often we are just like, that's all I need to do, because we've been shown it. That's what we've been taught, right? So that's all we know to do. Or you probably know somebody, right, who does this, right? Or they wield it's something that gets quite toxic. It's something we wield the money thing. Like, oh, well, I make all the money here. It's like, oh, that's you're moving into a very dangerous territory, and that can start to become quite controlling. You're overbearing on people because of the fact, your partner, your wife, your children, right? Because of money. And it's never a good look. It's actually quite abusive and toxic. It can become quite controlling when you start having those sorts of conversations, those sentences when it comes to money. Right. Number 4, relationship labor. Now, relationship labor overlaps a little bit with emotional labor. It's things like initiating conversations in a relationship that need to be had, looking at patterns that are occurring in the relationship need to be looked at, maintaining the bond and health of the relationship. And also this idea of being really responsible for the us and the we in the relationship, not just you. This kind of steeps into, maybe you're in a relationship and it's like, hey, relationship labor is like, hey, I've noticed that when we get into conflict, you shut down and you stop talking. And I really want to talk about things. That's a bit of relationship labor. You're pointing to a pattern that's occurring in the relationship. Initiating a difficult conversation might be like, hey, we haven't really been spending much time together, right? Or this thing you're doing, it's causing me, I feel like this when you do that thing. These are all these little aspects of relationship labor. And I guess ideally what we're looking at when it comes to relationship is that both people are doing this, because this one is like emotional labor. It takes this sonar of feeling into the state of relationship, but not just that. It also, you have to keep your eyes open and notice what's occurring. This is like self-awareness and reflectiveness of paying attention to the relationship. And again, as men, we can be really bad at this one, and we just ignore the state of relationship and like, well, we're not broken up, so everything's fine. But that isn't really a state we have to think about. Or what happens, I see with a lot of men, is that there's a fear about starting conversations, about bringing these topics, so they avoid them. So these conversations don't happen in a relationship. So the relationship labor, the man's doing the relationship labor internally, but there's no external showing of this actually happening between him and his partner, right? And that creates resentment. Resentment destroys relationships. This is something I want to just hammer home to you again and again and again, because it's very, very important. And actually something for those of you that are single but listen to this, when you, and this counts for all of these, right? In the early days of a relationship, women predominantly, if I'm honest, right, they're looking for evidence. A good, healthy woman is looking for evidence of your ability to take on some of these labors. It's not always women. Sometimes it's a man doing this, but women are often looking for this because women are very sensitive to emotional labor and the amount of labor they do, right? There's various research that goes into this and so forth. So be really, really mindful, right? Ultimately, right? As a man, that's like, oh, am I showing in the early doors of a relationship or dating that I will have difficult conversations, I will organize dates. This is the sort of thing that shows it. Organizing dates, asking good questions, being curious, sharing about how you feel about things in your own life and your own patterns and your own future. And then the next one, which will connect in, is actually being like, this initiating sex, but it's also about being curious about your partner as a sexual being as well, right? Not just having your one track that you run through, you do your 5 checkpoints that you do every single time, but actually being curious about them will show that you are willing to kind of be attuned to them and so forth. So number 5 is sexual labor, right? This one I think is often one of the most uncomfortable ones for people to talk about and do anything about. We still have so much taboo about sex. As much as like sex is, we are more free with sex, and that's meant that, you know, I saw an Instagram post recently where someone was saying that the price of sex has gone down. Like, you know, saying that 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it would be, you know, marriage, basically, is what she's saying. That would be the price of sex. Like, you'd have to marry someone to then have sex with them. And saying that, you know, by the 80s, it became the price of, you know, like 3 dates, for example. And then now it's like, can you bother to send a message? I think that's a bit reductive, but there is a labor, right? And I think you have to remember this in a relationship, like, because what does sexual labor look like? Let me just explain that. It can look like initiating sex and intimacy, initiating touch as well. You know, you could call it eroticism, erotic touch, or you could call it even just physical intimacy, right? We call this intimacy labor, but I've called it sexual labor. Maintaining polarity, you know, like maintaining a spark of playfulness, of connectivity, yeah? Bringing in a different range and texture of sexual experience, right? Maybe, you know, you long for BDSM, you go down that road, or you long for, I don't know, man, sensory play, or to go to sex parties and stuff like that. The sexual labor is to bring this up and do that. Another part of sexual labor would be to attuning yourself to your partner's sexual needs. Like, what do they like? What do they enjoy? How they like to be touched? You know, paying attention. Sexual education as well for the two of you, for yourself, for the two of you, is a sexual labor. Like, oh, you know, I'm notorious, you know, you guys know I'm trained in as a tantric. So, you know, bringing books like, oh, should we read this book? Should we watch this program about this thing? You know, these are all labors, you know, that we have. Noticing, like, where's our sex life at? Where's our sex life at? And let's have a conversation about our sex life. Sexual labor, because you're thinking about it, you're noticing, you're feeling it. You bring this to the attention of the two of you in your relationship, right? Because ultimately what this is holding is responsibility. And you can probably get this feel with all of these labors per se, is responsibility. Even the word labor is like sexual responsibility, I think sounds better. But it's all really about taking responsibility of this area, or be willing to take responsibility in this area, right? Because too often what we do is we don't take responsibility and we just wait to be told what we should be responsible for, right? This is when I talk about sexual leadership with men. This is what I'm really talking about, yeah? And then, like I said, there's an attunement as a feeling element to this. Is not just like initiating sex all the time in the same way. It's like noticing, like, oh, actually, I've noticed that when you, maybe this is an internal conversation. I notice when I initiate sex in this particular way, she doesn't really respond. What do I want to do about that? Do I want to learn some new ways to initiate sex, or do I need to have a conversation about that? You know, is there no playfulness, no sexual innuendo and touch, and the way we look at each other, is that really gone to just functional? Or is there a lack of like playfulness and kind of tussle in our lives, right? And like reigniting that and do something about it. This is where we take on that labor, because all of this stuff has to be thought about, has to be organized, and so forth. Number 6, conflict labor, right? And this is really simple. It's very similar to intimacies, aren't these? But conflict labor is like, you know, be willing to enter into conflict, you know, regulating your own defensiveness, regulating your emotions during, listening during conflict, looking to repair any ruptures, noticing when there's a rupture, you know, not fall into the 4 horsemen of relationship apocalypse, which comes from the Gottmans, which is defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism, and contempt, you know, and that can be inside of conflict. It can be noticing like, hey, I'm noticing we start to raise our voices. Why don't we take 5 minutes and relax, take 5 minutes and go away and come back together, right? It's creating peacefulness. Yeah, creating co-regulation so that you can actually have important conversations. Another one here, it's about growth, the labor of growth of the relationship. This can kind of touch on, you know, the aspects of relationship labor, but this is the growth. Like, how are we growing as people? How are we growing as parents? If you've got kids, and it's like, oh, how are we becoming better parents? This could be buying of books, thinking of new stages your kids are going to go through. This can be linked to relationship labor around patterns, but it's like, how do we grow as people? Do we need to learn about money? Do we need to learn about DIY and doing up a house? Like, how do we grow as human beings? How do we grow as a couple together, right, in our relationship, right? This could even be bringing in hobbies for the two of you to do together, right? Because, it's very easy to grow apart and have your separate hobbies and do your separate things, but bringing in hobbies and suggesting like, hey, let's start playing table tennis together. There's a table tennis table somewhere we can go and play on. Like, it's these sorts of things. It's like putting your attention to the growth of a relationship, growth of the two of you, your home, and the identity that you are wanting to embody, who the two of you want to be, right? Because too often we outsource this, or we don't even think it's something that needs to be thought about, right? And then partners grow apart and they get frustrated. Number 7, physical labor. This is a really wide-reaching one, physical labor. And this can be from anything from like building stuff in the home, painting, decorating, building furniture, IKEA stuff. I keep thinking of IKEA stuff. It keeps coming to my head, but it's also things like housework, right? Putting up shelves, looking after the garden, right? It could be changing tires on the car. Like, it's the physical stuff, because there's with the physical stuff, there is an element of cognitive labor here, but you still need to do it. You still need to do the thing, right? And, it could be cleaning, tidying, organizing the home, organizing that cupboard, that everybody has a cupboard that's got a lot of shit in it that they don't know what to do with. Organizing that. It's these sorts of things, right? And though the cognitive labor might be thinking that there's a cupboard that needs organizing, and then there's the action of actually doing it. And that's a physical labor that we have to take on and do, right? So this is where we can actually, I think a lot of guys love I'm not a hands-on guy, right? I'm not one of these guys that fixes and builds stuff. And I think I'd like to be, I just haven't found the capacity and time to learn those sorts of skills. I never had a man around to teach these skills when I was a kid. So I've always just employed people to do it. I can do IKEA furniture like there's no tomorrow. But if you ask me to build something from bits of wood, I'd be useless, right? So maybe for me, there could be like, okay, I want to go and learn about how to build stuff. I might go into YouTube and learn, right? I want to learn how to build, I don't know, some drums or something, right? I don't know. But it's like doing that stuff, or looking after the garden. I'm going to learn about gardening. I'm going to learn about flowers. Like, my mum knows so much about flowers and gardening, There's this wonderful garden. She grows all sorts of food, and we often have meals that are almost, we'll have a salad or something that's completely come from her garden. It's like learning about those things and executing it. And then I'm hearing the voice of me is younger than me. Like, I don't want a garden. I don't want to fuck around in a garden and do all that stuff, but it's like the garden's part of your home, it adds to your home. So this physical labor takes energy. Yeah. And this next one, 8, which I've called like family relationships labor. It's the labor that it can be family and friends relationship labor. So it's like the labor that it takes to maintain these relationships outside us to the family. This could be, messaging your uncles and aunts. It could be keeping up with your nephews and cousins, like feeling this element of being connected. Keeping in contact when people are sick, checking in on them, calling your grandma, all these sorts of things, video calling your grandparents and stuff like that. Like, it's this sorts of labor, right, where we keep friendships maintained and investing in them. This is an important word that's come up a few times with men I've worked with. Investing in friendships as a couple, as an individual even. And this is something that men historically we're really bad at, is investing in our friendships, right? And this is work, takes effort to do, because you have to think, okay, I haven't heard from so-and-so for a while. I wonder how they're doing. Let me check in on them. They've got twins. Let me chat to them. Oh, there's that person I haven't spoken to them for a while. Let me see how they are. It's like, this takes effort and labor, right? And this is something that we can take on and we can do. And it's important because it's part of the ecosystem of our relationship, the extended aspects of it as well. Right, we're almost there. Last one, number 9. And I've added this one in because I think this is something that's growing. And I see that, again, it's one of those bits of labor I think we just palm off. Technology labor. We are increasingly living in homes and lives that are increasingly technological. I'm sitting in front of a laptop that has apps on it, that has installed apps, that has web apps, that has hardware that's connected. I've got a microphone, how do I sort this out? I've got a light up here, I've got a light back there. All these things are a type of labor. We've got internet connections that need managing. Maybe you've got a mesh network at home because your internet's downstairs and your office is upstairs, right? You need TVs that need buying. Does the TV connect to the thing? Is the TV, what research needs to be done to have a good TV? You want electronics. Do you want to buy a, what's it called? You want to buy a speaker? What sort of speaker? What sort of range do we need? The research that's needed for these sorts of things. Who's fixing the internet when it doesn't work? Who's fixing the internet when it doesn't work? Who's restarting the router? Who's going to log on to the router and figure out what's happened to the router? That's something that I do from my tech years. I know exactly how to do that. This is a labor in this day and age that takes more and more time. Like every week you're having to deal with something. Like maybe there's you have one of these digital thermostats for the home, right? That's connected to the phone and all these sorts of things. Who's going to set that up for everybody? Labor, right? These are things that need to be done. Troubleshooting apps. If you've got kids, making sure the parental controls are all on there. Finding out about new apps that you need. If you do have kids, to find out new apps you don't want them to see, AI, like all these things, it's becoming labor, right? It's becoming labor. Right? And these things take effort. And if we don't pay attention to them, they just fall on one person that's going to do them, And then I haven't even added in kids, because I think kids is a whole labor on its own. I see that now. It's huge labor, right? So if one person looks after the kids 90% of the time, or they're thinking about the kids 90% of the time and organizing all their stuff, that's another bit of labor that comes up that can be stressful and difficult. So if we don't start to manage these things, we don't not just manage, if we don't have an awareness of these and appreciation for these things, then we start to take our partners for granted and they start getting resentful, and then it erodes our relationship. That's why your relationship's sexless. That's why you barely talk. This is why you're disconnected, because it feels like you're disconnected, because this is all the work of the relationship. You're not doing the work. So this is where, say, if you had a colleague that you worked with, and say all the 9 things that I've described are part of the job, and he just didn't do them, what would you do? You'd sack him. You'd get annoyed with him because he wasn't pulling his weight, right? He wasn't pulling his weight in the job, and you were having to pick up the slack. You would get frustrated. You would get annoyed. You would either have a word if you're that way inclined, or you just passively say nothing, get resentful, quit your job, or ask your boss to say something to him, right? And this is what's happening in our relationships, where there's a chronic imbalance, right? And the challenge, I think, for men is appreciation, as I've mentioned, is to take on some of these things quietly. You can take them on quietly, you just start doing them. You don't have to create a big emotional and song and dance about it, right? Or you can acknowledge and take on, hey, I see you're doing these things all the time. I'm just going to take that. You don't need to do that. Yeah. Or acknowledge that, hey, I can see this is really bringing a lot of stress. I'd like to take this off your hands. I'm going to take this off your hands. Or you can go the route of offering respite. Hey, I see, you've been taking a lot of things on in these last couple of months in a relationship, doing these things. Hey, I booked you in a spa for the day. All of these will go a long way. But ultimately, if you start taking on these labors more and more in your relationship, in your life, as your responsibility, things will go a long way. And the one I think is most important to cultivate is emotional labor. Emotional, mental, because ultimately the tech labor, the physical labor of putting up shelves and stuff, you might just do easily, but you're not thinking about how you're growing as a relationship, or the sexual labor, for instance, you want to avoid because it's uncomfortable. So this is important, and this is a good thing to share. Ladies, if you're listening to this, share this with your partner. He needs to listen to this. This is really important. This makes a difference to a relationship. And this is a lot of the things actually I'm going to talk about, especially the aspects of self-leadership and sexual labor, sexual intimacy and leadership, and looking at our patterns and really becoming the man that we want to be, not just for ourselves, but for our relationship. And our relational capacity is what we're going to be doing in Relate. So if you're interested in that, Relate, there's a what's it called down below, a wait list, which is soon to close. So if you miss out on the wait list, then the price is going to go up. So jump on the wait list. You'll be the first to know about when it starts. It's going to be starting next month. And then you can join and get involved. I've also got a free workshop that's happening on the 25th of February, which is called Remasculate, which is you're really going to learn about the various aspects of what's missing from how you're showing up as a man to create the sort of relationship you want, whether that's dating, whether that's in relationships. And that's a free workshop. You can come for absolutely nothing. And the link is below to sign up to that. Men, share this with someone else. All I have to say is comment below if you found this interesting. Like, share, goes a long way to me helping more and more men. And I say ciao, ciao.